Hi, my dragons. Welcome to part 2. It is now morning, and you're still on my deck. Okay, so last night I did 2 recordings of part 1 and none of part 2, so here is part 2. I keep looking down because my little beagle is getting tangled up in the table over here, so hopefully she'll figure it out, but I don't know, she's not the brightest dog in the world. So anyway, we were talking about phobias and learning and all of those fun kind of things. So I want to make sure that you understand that learning alone doesn't prepare you for this. It's many things. It's genetics, it's conversations with other people, conversations with your family, friends, and then the memories, okay? So memory is not just, your thoughts, okay? It's your emotions, it's your senses, what you hear, what you feel, what you taste, what you smell, what you learn, and what you perceive as a threat. So sometimes you'll smell something, you'll go, oh, that doesn't smell right. It smells dangerous. Or you'll hear, they show this in the horror movies all the time, this creaking in the woods. Oh my God, it's going to be something scary. Or the music, dramatic music is coming, so I'm hearing it, so I know that it's going to be frightening. So all of those things combine sometimes, and sometimes one alone is enough. I know that when I'm hiking in the woods and I have a really good sense of smell. If I can smell something that's dead. So I'm like, there's a dead thing near here. Everybody laughs when that happens, but it always happens. And there it is, the dead thing. So knowing is part of emotional cognition, emotional memory. The way you perceive and think about things, if it's a danger or if it's a benefit, it goes into long-term memory so that you'll always have it and you can access it to your advantage. Cognitive psychologists talk about the role of attention, and we're going to talk about all this in greater detail, but one of the best researchers in cognitive psychology in terms of paying attention is Tversky and Kahneman, and they do levels of attention that people pay to things so that they understand how things go from short-term memory to long-term memory. We're going to talk about all that, so don't get nervous about it. So paying attention is really important. Now, one of the things in forensic psychology, when we use memory, of course, we're using it for victim identification. How well do people remember what happened to them if they are victims of a crime? Have to have my Dunkin' Donuts coffee. And previously in the law, because they don't have to take a rotation in psychology, especially not forensic psychology, which I don't understand why that wouldn't be such a good benefit, and I have taught it at law schools. But memory is not like a camera, not like a video device or your phone or something like that. It is not like that at all. That's a passive thing, and it creates an image, and that image is there in its pristine and unaltered form forever and ever. But you are not passive. You are an active participant in creating memories. So you change them minutely all the time. You take something, it happens to you, it's an experience, you encode it, you put it into short-term memory, then if it's important, you pass it on to long-term memory, and then something happens again, and then it goes back into short-term memory, and you change it again. And so you're always processing memories. It doesn't seem like it, but you're always processing it, okay? If you looked at, there's a lot of different things that can affect it, and your book talks about the Brewer and Trayens study, where they asked students went into a professor's office and they asked the students what was in the office. Did you see books? And they said yes, they saw a lot of books when there was no books in the office, okay? That's because they're following a script. The script is what you expect to find in a professor's office. You expect to find books in a professor's office. And so absent the fact that there were no books, they just put them in because that's their stereotype, that's what they expected to see. Whether they saw them or not, that was the script that they had. So this is how stereotypes form, whether they're accurate or not, and it forms from belief, expectations, and experience. And they're not always accurate, okay? And that's where we get into issues in the law, and we've seen this over and over and over again, especially with wrongful convictions where the bulk of the testimony, there's my dog's tail, the bulk of the testimony relies on eyewitness testimony, which we're all human. We all have these cognitive processing errors. There was a good example in your book. They're asking people about emotional memories, such as, where were you when, in my situation, when John Kennedy was shot? I was just a kid, okay? So I wasn't that old. But anyway, when Bobby Kennedy was shot, when Martin Luther King was shot, when the space shuttle exploded, when 9/11 happened. See, I've lived through a lot of those national tragedies. So some people will report with confidence exactly where they were, what happened, what was going on. And researchers found that they're not always accurate, okay? Because they're emotional, and we're human beings, and we change the memory every time we think of it. I happened to be on a plane on 9/11 when coming back from Massachusetts, just my luck, right? And it was funny because I was on the plane. I took a red eye, so that means I was flying early in the morning. And I remember looking out the window of the plane, and it was a beautiful, clear, just gorgeous morning. The plane was almost empty because it was such an early flight. And I remember thinking to myself, why am I so nervous about flying all the time? Look at this. This is beautiful. Plane landed. I jumped in my car. I went to Tiffin because I had a class in, I think it was either psychology of violence and aggression or psychology of law, one of those. And one of my other students burst into the class and said, we're under attack, we're under attack. Someone just flew into the World Trade Center. And I literally looked at her and said, do you even know what the World Trade Center is? Because she was from Ohio. Anyway, it was really pretty funny. And I even remember the gal's name. She was a former student of mine. And yeah, that started a whole bunch of stuff. So just because you think you remember all of the details, you may not. We also know that emotional memories are good at the core memory, but not good at the peripheral things. So you may not know that, see, I couldn't remember which class I was in. I remembered what happened, but I can't remember which class I was in. They asked George Bush what happened. Where were you? What was going on? What did you think? What did you feel? And he gave 3 different accounts to the news media because he's human too, you know? He has these distortions in memory just like everybody else, okay? So that's a fallibility, and it's something to watch out for in jury trials, especially when the bulk of the evidence rests on, eyewitness testimony. So, so the Naser and Harsh study asked people where they were during the Challenger explosion. Again, another example. And the same thing happened with the other events. They were very certain about what they said, but when they checked up on it, it was wrong, incorrect, okay? So this is a consistent finding that we have when we look at this type of memory. We also exchange memories with other people, and their memories influence our memories and future memories, okay? Trobeck talked about the movie memory where the researcher deliberately misled them, and later on when they had to recall it, they recalled the misled memories, things like that. So the exchange of information with other people, that's a really big thing that affects your memory, and you have to be aware of that, okay? So in culture, we tell, we retell, and then we have this one collective amalgam of memory that may be inaccurate because it's based on not only your memory, but also the memory of a lot of different people that changes with each telling of it, okay? So also the things that we focus in on does vary by culture, by the cultural behaviors. So like in the Asian culture, you're not supposed to be talking about certain traumatic events, so they remember the traumatic event differently than like in a Western culture, like in the United States, where we tell everybody everything, and there you go. It also has an effect on history, and people who know me know that I'm a history buff, so I really like history. But here's the problem with history. History is written by the victors, the people who won the wars, the people who were the conquerors. Very rarely do you have history discussed by the people, okay? Howard Zinn was a professor emeritus at Boston University. Excuse me for a minute. And he wrote a really good book. He did a lot of research. He was a historian. He did a lot of research, and he wanted to see what the people's perspective was. So he wrote this really good book. I highly recommend it. I say this all the time. Students never read the books. A couple of years ago, one of my students read this book, and she was like, oh my God. She couldn't believe it. So what he did was he talked to people, just ordinary people. How did you feel about this event? How did you feel about this? What did you think of World War II? And he got this really different view of history than what we teach our kids in school. And we have a mechanism for that in the United States. It's called StoryCorps. You can just go to storycorps.org, and it's fascinating. If you have nothing to do on a nice day, not a nice day, a rainy day, and you want to, turn off the TV, get yourself a nice, well, if you're under 21, don't do this, but get yourself a nice cup of coffee, like a nice Dunkin's coffee, right? And listen to these stories from people who talk about their lives. It's unbelievable, really, really excellent. So storycorps.org. Or the moth. More about the moth later. Very cool. So anyway, so the history is really interesting. I'm from Massachusetts, okay? So every Thanksgiving, me and my nieces and nephews, we go off to Plymouth Rock just to watch the tourists who have made the trek all the way from like Montana, Minnesota, whatever, to see Plymouth Rock. And then they look at it and they go, oh my God, that's it? It's so little. They literally believe growing up, because they were taught about this in school, that there is a rock and the pilgrims got off the boat and stepped on that rock. Anyone from New England knows that, you know, a big boat like the Mayflower cannot come all the way to shore. Okay? You need to have a dinghy, a little boat. And they're just like blown away by this. So it's really a shocking retelling of history from their perspective. It's always really fun to watch. And there's always protests there by the Native Americans trying to tell their side of the story. So that you see a clash of memories, and it's really super, super interesting. I love doing that. It's one of my favorite things in the world. I remember, I don't know if it was this class or the other class, I made so many videos telling people that I grew up in a very Portuguese culture. And so when I was a kid, they talked about the great adventurous Portuguese people who conquered the world, right? The Portuguese Empire was huge. We had Brazil and Timor and all these different places that they colonized. And so one of our big heroes is Magellan, Portuguese, a guy you might have heard about him, first one to sail around the world, blah, blah, blah. And so, you know, he's our hero. So this year I went to South Africa this past March when all this stuff broke out. I was in South Africa just to see where Bartholomew Dias, another Portuguese guy, was the first person to sail around the tip of Africa. And this summer I was supposed to go to Patagonia to see the Straits of Magellan, where Magellan sailed because it's the 500th anniversary. So Magellan is our big hero. So I decided to read a bunch of books about Magellan so that I would know this. What a jerk. He was such a jerk. It totally shattered my belief in Magellan. I was like, oh my God, this guy for real? He was terrible. So there you go. And we have this is how we miscalculate other cultures and how we develop negative stereotypes, sometimes positive stereotypes, okay? Because our brain is working against us, okay? So we believe things, and it shapes our knowledge of the world, just like news and social media, how we know things, how we communicate things, what we believe. It's all based on all this memory coming out of long-term memory, reshaping memory. When I was a kid, a popular TV show was Bullwinkle and Rocky, and two characters were Boris and Natasha, and they were Russian, and they spoke funny, and they were very greedy and evil. And during that time, we were having the Cold War with Russia, and I think that those negative stereotypes of Russia are still pervasive in our culture. Last summer, I was in Russia, and it was a vibrant, beautiful, fun place. I met so many great people, I had a great time, and they hated Trump and Putin. They really hated Putin, and you never get that here. You know, you don't get that as much as when you're there. So it was really, really eye-opening. But a lot of places, and a lot of companies want you to have those stereotypes. They want you to have those memories stuck in your head. And in the next part, it's only going to be a short part, I want to talk to you about some of the ways that companies do that.